Welcome, everyone. I'm Don Schreiber, and this is Clearing the Air, a four-part conversation series on air pollution from oil and gas production here in New Mexico and how it impacts us as New Mexicans and our climate. So we've been gathering once a month since June as we prepare for an important rulemaking by our state's Environment Department. And we're going to call that Environment Department the NMED. So that begins next month. And you can find all of our episodes, our past episodes of Clearing the Air at cavu.org, that's cavu.org/clearing the air. So on our third episode today, we're joined by Barbara Weber, the Executive Director of Health Action New Mexico. Barbara, it is so good to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I am glad to be here.
Welcome. Hey, Barbara Weber. What does Health Action New Mexico do? Why does a health organization work on climate change? And tell us a little about your background and how long Health Action New Mexico has been working and advocating for methane and ozone rules, and why.
Well, thank you for those questions. Health Action New Mexico has been operating in New Mexico for the last 28 years. And our mission is to see that everyone residing in New Mexico has equitable access to quality, accountable, and affordable health care. And with that comes all the education. We do a lot of policies based around our mission in the legislature each year, but that's based on not only rounding what's happening in New Mexico, but what's happening at the federal level and what's happening in other states. We don't mind stealing good ideas from other states as well. And we also do projects on the ground because we don't think we could be good informers of policy if we weren't in connection with what's going on at the grassroots. For example, right now we're involved in a project to get unvaccinated farm workers and isolated rural adults in southern New Mexico. So those are the kinds of small projects we do, but we see them as critical to policy making as well. In terms of why we were involved in climate change and the methane issues in New Mexico, because that's health. There's nothing more primary to health than the air we breathe, the ground we walk on, and gives us the plants that we eat and the water we drink. So understanding that, and you ask about a little bit about me, and I could say, well, okay, I've had a somewhat long career. I've worked in third world countries around healthcare issues, Latin America and West Africa. I've worked in women's health issues, including domestic violence, sexual assault, hospice, long-term care. But I grew up, excuse me, I grew up in a rural town in rural panhandle of Texas that was at that time known as the carbon black center of the world. And our little town of 15,000 had on one side of it the constant flaring of gas 24 hours a day. I mean, hundreds of flares going up because they only needed one part of the gas to make their carbon black. And then on the other hand, we had carbon black coming out of the refineries. And so when you were 30 miles from our town, you saw nothing but a black cloud. And that's what we lived in. So when I went to college, back in those days, you had to get a x-ray, a chest x-ray. And when they looked at it, they said, oh, no, you have to go to the doctor and make sure this isn't something contagious. And the doctor wrote on it, no, this is just carbon black particles in the lungs. And so I didn't think much about it. And I think most people don't think about how we're impacted by our environment. But now and throughout my adult life, I've had low oxygenation rates, which became more critical when you think of COVID, because I start out with a baseline that's lower than most people. So I myself know what it is to grow up in an environmentally polluted environment. So I'm aware of that. And I think, again, we've been involved with the methane issue and ozone pollution issue for about 6 years. And I think it came to kind of a head for us was when NASA identified that cloud over the basin, the large methane cloud. And I think that was a wake-up call for all of us. We need to take this issue so seriously in New Mexico. So we jumped on board at that point.
Yeah, gosh, what a history. Why be involved in methane? Because it's health. And I think today we're going to kind of try to focus on that. And we're so glad to have an expert like you here, plus your experience in growing up on the Panhandle. Can I ask what town that was?
Sure. It's Borger, which is about 50 miles north of Amarillo.
Right. So east of New Mexico.
Yes. Yes. So I spent a lot of my childhood in New Mexico and between the two. So know both worlds well.
Okay. Well, it's unfortunate to say those carbon black plants are still running.
Oh, yeah.
So, and then your experience growing up there as a child might have compromised your health going forward for the rest of your life. Did I hear you say that correctly?
Absolutely. And I can tell a lot of stories. Black lung disease is prominent in the community I was. A lot of people have lost their parents to it. Some people just from washing the clothes of people who had it have also been affected. So it's very powerful. But as I say, growing up, you didn't think about it. And I think that's true for a lot of people. We think of health and we think of getting our shots at the doctors or having a surgery, but we're not stopping to think holistically about what really impacts our health. Why is there so much cancer in our society? Not what the treatments are, those are important, but why do we have so much cancer, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, my parallel experience is growing up in Farmington, New Mexico, which is the second largest natural gas producer, the San Juan Basin. Farmington's kind of at the center of that, historically in the continental United States. And I refer to it as a goldfish bowl of fossil fuel. You just grew up in it. You saw the flares everywhere. The processing plants didn't want certain parts of the gas chemistry that was coming out of there, so they just flared it off. And a giant plant in Librook, New Mexico, Southern Union still has it there. And they ran it for my whole life as a childhood, driving back and forth to Albuquerque. You could see it for miles and miles and miles and miles, just ran all the time. So unfortunately, I think that's impacted all of us here around oil and gas issues. We're talking about the emissions. And Barbara, thank you so much for being with us here today. I wonder, have you all heard about, I'm talking to viewers as well as you, Barbara, here about the IPCC report that's now just out, a code red for humanity. So we need to take action on climate now. We cannot wait another moment. In their report, the IPCC identifies methane pollution as one of the key drivers of climate change. Methane is an extremely powerful greenhouse gas. It's 80 times more potent than CO2. And CO2, carbon dioxide, kind of gets all the big headlines. But we're going to come back and talk about methane, how the San Juan Basin, where I live, got famous in that hotspot. But in the face of all these challenges, your background and mine, the IPCC report, all of those things that are in our face in our face today, we can be excited about the progress that we're making here in New Mexico. And for the first time ever, our state government is looking at really revising and strengthening and creating some methane rules, some ozone precursor rules, and that's to the credit of Governor Juan Basin. So she made that a priority with her executive order number 003 in January, just a few days after she had taken office. So I'm very pleased to have a governor that is championed driving towards national leading methane and oil and gas pollution rules. That was her goal then, and I think we're all trying to help her achieve that now. So we will share today some stories directly from the Permian Basin. And that is the most active oil field in the United States today. It's also the most polluting and in the country. And we want you to hear some stories of people that live down there and how they're impacted. And we've got a couple of videos of that. So let's watch that now.
My name is Nick King. I'm the pastor at the Carlsbad Mennonite Church here. Reducing methane emission in New Mexico is important to me because it's, first of all, an issue of survival, life and death, that we only have a certain amount of time before the pollution in the air will cause climate change to come and heat and make this even more unsustainable. Secondly, it's a matter of health, that for a lot of people, breathing is more difficult because of this stuff that is put into the air. Third, it's a financial thing. We're wasting resources that could be sold. Fourth, it's the right thing to do. This is God's creation, and we need to be all aware of dumping stuff into the air is just as bad as dumping stuff into the river or beside the road. That we need to take care of God's creation. This is a gift of God that we can use and enjoy, but we need to take care of it for the long term.
Hello everyone, so my name is Miguel Escoto. I'm 22. I'm an organizer with Earthworks and with Sunrise Movement. There is no such thing as an environmentally friendly fracking industry. It just does not exist. Methane emission is inevitably tied to this industry. I think it's very admirable and very necessary for the state of New Mexico to attempt to implement very progressive fracking regulations. Hopefully, state agencies are able to successfully enact such a regulation that does not have glaring loopholes. It's essential for these regulations to be in compliance with the climate science. Through the IPCC reports say that we drastically need to transition to renewable energy. So yes, we should talk about regulating the industry, but even more important than that is understanding and creating regulations to justly transition away from the fracking industry.
Wow, that Permian Basin, what those people are having to go through down there, Miguel and Nick representing on behalf of all that are in the Permian Basin. That's very hard to hear and to know what they've been going through and what they're dealing with. Barbara, what are your thoughts after listening to Nick and to Miguel?
I think I had a couple of thoughts. One is that you had a young person who was very knowledgeable about the issue and was taking a position and working on it, but also not just on mitigating and looking at the fossil fuel industry, but also thinking about the future and what had to transition to really get us away from that. So I think looking at that long-term view, which isn't such a long-term view now, but has to happen. And I think also hearing Nick talk about the stewardship we have of the planet. And the IPCC report made us aware that the window is closing. We've been hearing it for 40 years. We've had the science telling us what was going to happen. Now it's happening. So it's the idea that the window's closing and we have very little time to really mobilize everyone and put in place the public will to see that there's the transitions that need to happen to really make this issue go in the right direction.
Code Red for Humanity.
Yeah.
In that IPCC report And uh, listening to Miguel talk about um, just transition, not just regulations for now, as he
Right.
stated, it's good that we're working on regulations now, but we need to keep moving through that to find a just transition away from the oil and gas industry that has driven New Mexico for over 90 years and has still left us often in the most important metrics in 48 and 49 and even last for child welfare and many other issues and
That's right.
health issues. So there's that. And then Nick, of course, talking about the stewardship. Thank you for framing it like that, that we are not just here for resource extraction. We don't just live in that goldfish bowl of fossil fuels without tremendous cost to the rest of us. So thanks, Barbara, for that, for your insight on that. But what I want to stop for a second and say is thank you to Nick and to Miguel. I got to know Miguel, such an outstanding young man. We served on Governor Lujan Grisham's methane advisory panel together for many months in 2019, working on the upcoming, at that time, New Mexico Oil Conservation Division rules, which have now gone into effect, and then the rules that are coming from the New Mexico Environment Department. So if you're ready, Barbara, we can talk about those New Mexico Environment Department rules, the NMED rules, and say a few things about them. Let me talk a little bit about that rule, and then just jump in anytime you have something to say, and I would love for you to interrupt me. So NMED has proposed strong oil and gas pollution rules, and they're trying to rein in ozone and methane produced by New Mexico oil and gas industry. I just want to emphasize again what I said earlier. This is a first. We recognize some climate problems, we recognize health problems off and on. Never has it been assigned, as it should be, to the oil and gas industry here in New Mexico. Governor Lujan Grisham did that in her executive order, and the methane advisory panel followed that with many months of work. Then the OCD, the New Mexico Oil and Gas Division, followed that with writing rules of their own. Now we're going into the second set of rules, which is the Environment Department, more involved with air and water in the NMED ruling. So it's terrible that we're famous for the hotspot, the Four Corners hotspot that NASA found that you referred to, Barbara, earlier. It made such an impact on me when it was released. Do you remember when it came out that this was really, here was a big map of really North America, and here's this big orange kind of ugly spot right over where, the Four Corners. Remember what that was like when you saw that?
I very much remember it, the shock of it, and then also the irony that here we have some of the most beautiful country in the world, in my estimation, and we also have a very poor county, and we have the Native American tribes that comprise most of it, and here was this thing that we didn't even know about. I mean, it obviously didn't happen overnight. So it was a shock. I think it was a wake-up call.
I think it was. As I continue to say, it's something we don't want to be famous for.
Right.
And it is, having grown up here, I consider it one of the most beautiful places. We're talking about southern Colorado, southwestern Colorado, southeastern Utah, southwestern Utah, northeastern Arizona, and the northwest corner of New Mexico. It's just fabulous. 2/3 of our surface water in the state runs through here with the three rivers, the Animas, the La Plata, and the San Juan. Those are collectively called Tota in the Dene language. And it's just such a remarkable, unique place, yet we're overshadowed by this literally hanging over our head methane hotspot. And kind of to rub more irony in the wound, New York Times recently revealed that Houston-based Hillcore Energy Corporation, which is the largest methane producer in New Mexico, is also the largest methane polluter in the nation. That's the New York Times. So we're famous again for that, something that we don't want to be famous for. I do want to say that Governor Lujan Grisham and Secretary Kenny really have been responsive in the rules, both in the NMOCD rule that has gone into effect, and then this upcoming rule as it's being drafted and proposed. They've been responsive to people's concerns. The loophole that was so terrible, called the stripper loophole, no production wells that had been exempted in the proposed regulation, that the department and the administration responded to the outcry from nonprofits, experts like yourself, also individual citizens voicing their terrible concern over the stripper exemption, because it exempted in the range of 90% of the wells. Even though they were small producing, it just makes sense that if there's a lot of little polluters, that adds up to one great big bunch of pollution. So they've taken that out, and we need to, keep that in mind and compliment them for that. And that they have continually improved the rules, both NMOCD and the NMED rule as it's proposed. But there are still targeted areas that must be improved if we're going to have help the governor achieve her goal of being a nation-leading state in terms of controlling methane and ozone precursors. So let's talk about those regulations here today, and talk about how we can better protect our health with stronger regulations. So the Environmental Improvement Board, they will hear, like a court, the rules that the NMED proposes. And that's going to happen this fall, so get ready. I'm going to give you a date. I want you to save it to the watchers and listeners today. I want you to save this day. It's September 20th. That's when the hearings begin. They will go on for probably a couple, even 3 weeks as the hearing progresses. So it will be our big opportunity. CAVU, Clearing the Air, will be there. Other nonprofits, I know you'll participate, Barbara. And then people like Nick and people like Miguel from the Permian. Other people can directly participate in this process. And I'm speaking to you viewing the webcast today, and those that will listen to the podcast. This is your chance to raise your concerns. And you can make your voice heard in this process and learn more at methanemattersnm.org/take action. That's methanemattersnm.org/take action. You can sign up for the email updates and get the latest information about the hearing that's upcoming. So we'll be there, and we want you to join us, please. I'm going to. You are planning to be there, Barbara?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. And I know you've participated in many hearings before. Do you agree that citizen participation is extremely important in these hearings?
I think so, because not only because the issue is so important, but because there's still some work to be done on improving the rules, and particularly when we want to make them stronger for frontline communities. And you have to remember, there are 139,000 people approximately that live within half a mile of over 55,000 wells. So we know a lot about what the health conditions are of people who live within the half mile, and it's not good. So certainly protecting frontline workers or frontline people living in the area. We should also know that within half a mile, we have 99 schools connected to wells and child care centers. So first of all, there's a question of whether we should have schools and child care centers in that close proximity. But at least we need to do everything we can, beefing up the mitigation, the inspections, and that takes money, we know. So again, it's a question of public will in saying, no, this is too important to our people because of the terrible health effects that it has. And then also methane is bringing on climate crisis. And that is another health crisis in itself. We've seen that.
Exactly. And now we don't just see it in a melting iceberg. We see it at the Devil Springs Ranch where I live in Governador, New Mexico, traditional ranching community there, where we had the hottest years we've ever had. We've lost our snow over the past many years. And it was only 20 years ago when Jane and I started that ranch that I was up on the roof shoveling snow off because I was concerned about whether that would support as much snow as we had. So even in this, I mean, I think it's on everybody's plate, in their face, at their doorstep right now. No longer theoretical. That, I think, is the point, part of the point that the IPCC was making. So let me just talk about the San Juan Basin a little bit. We've touched on that, but I'm going to repeat several things today because I think it's important that we go over them again and again. The NASA discovery of a hot spot there, and then the burden that we know that leaves on frontline communities, and you've spoken to that already, Barbara, but the Navajo communities, Jicarilla, Southern Ute, and other communities, and on rural families like mine. That's where the oil and gas development traditionally has been and continues to be. And remember Hilcorp, the company that I said was the worst polluter in the nation? They're the biggest operator in the San Juan Basin. So they managed to achieve national status as a polluter just in one field here in the San Juan Basin. So you can imagine what that's like. And their pollution, this isn't per capita or by scale or per anything. It's just the raw amount of pollution, more than ExxonMobil, more than Chevron. That's what this company is doing. So we're really concentrated here, and frontline and rural communities bear the brunt of that. The other day, I watched Hilcorp frack job on a well a mile from our house, where they vented methane and all the chemicals that come with it for 4 days. I returned every day and watched for hours every day while they vented. That means they released the methane and all the chemicals right straight into the atmosphere. So they vented chemicals for 4 days and methane. Then at the very last, they flared for 4 hours, means that they took that vented gas and chemicals and they lit it on fire. That's a flare. So they flared it. So venting is the most impactful. That's where we're 80 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than CO2. Also, we create other kinds of gases with or other kinds of health threats when we flare the gas, when we set that on fire and burn it, and that's nitrous oxides or that. I'm going to come back to that, but I would just like to say that Health Action New Mexico is a critical link in here, dealing with what these health threats are. You see it, I am sure, throughout the Permian.
Absolutely. Like I say, we've got a large population that lives only a half a mile from the many oil and gas facilities and are exposed to the flaring. We know that among the frontline people that are living there, children and the elderly are most at risk. New Mexico has one of the highest rates in the country for asthma. So we can't say it's caused by this, though there are some cause-related studies. But we do know that in the Permian Basin, it's the highest area where people go to the hospital for asthma attacks and respiratory attacks and are hospitalized for asthma. So that tells you something. We also know that Eddy County was pointed out by the American Lung Association as having the second highest poor quality air quality in the country for any county. So add that to your list of things that we can be known for in New Mexico.
Another reason we don't want to be famous.
I know, things that we don't want to be famous for and we shouldn't be famous for. But, you know, with all the ozone that and the gases that you talk about that are related, when they release methane, they also release gases, and some of them are horrible. Benzene, which many of us remember because it finally got taken off the commercial market in most senses. And I remember having benzene up in the cabinet in my household. But it's a known carcinogen. And so when you're living close to a facility, we know that congenital birth defects increase by 40 to 70%. We know that low weight and preterm babies are born 40% and 20% respectively in terms of preterm and a low weight. And New Mexico has a higher rate of low weight and preterm births than most of the country. And we know that this also increases the risk of cancer by 8 times. So we can't be surprised when people get cancer because we're breathing in air that will bring us into a carcinogen. So even being exposed to benzene, for example, when you say they're flaring, being exposed to that intensely for 1 hour can cause cardiac arrhythmias. And then on goes the list of neurological, respiratory impacts that all of this has on our population, causing premature deaths, strokes, cardiac. I think there's a study that I saw last year documenting specifically climate-related or ozone-related issues in Las Cruces in terms of the increase to the hospital for cardiac issues. So it's not just the food we eat, it's also the air we breathe that bring a lot of our health problems. And we need to start thinking in those terms. Obviously, one of the troubling things is that now that we're in the COVID pandemic, that people that have the respiratory problems, that have the cardiac problems from the ozone and from the air quality are also more at risk for COVID. And we certainly saw that in both the North and the South, in the San Juan and the Permian Basin. So.
Yes, I would like, if you'll allow me, I would like to back up. I hate hearing these terrible things that's happening and what we're not happy to be famous for, Barbara, but can you connect for, say, just for me, and maybe our listeners or watchers are interested as well, but for me, can you connect how that methane, that CH4 molecule that's now in the air, or the benzene, the toluene, how that, or the smog, how does that trigger or set up, precondition people for health problems? Can you get us a little deeper into the medical part of that?
Sure. When you have the methane going into the air, and but with it are released something called volatile organic compounds. We don't have to remember that. It's just that they're very toxic gases that are being released as well. And the particulates that are in the air, and we're very aware of this, at least in Albuquerque, because we had the smoke crisis, and we now are seeing this every summer. The wildfire smoke comes in, we already have our own ozone, and then it becomes, there are alerts telling the elders, children, and the general public not to go out if you don't have to. And this is the time where everyone is outdoors. So it triggers the respiratory issues that you see, but it also, it triggers it affects the liver, it affects the kidneys, it affects the whole body. So I think there are 2 health crises, and one way to look at it is the health crisis from the actual flaring and what it causes in terms of, and the venting and what's released into the air. The second crisis is that the methane particularly is such a potent greenhouse gas that it's triggering the climate crisis. And the climate crisis is a health crisis on its own. I mean, we've seen that. People are not going to have, you mentioned the water. We're not going to have the water to grow our food, to feed our animals, to feed ourselves. I mean, to have water for ourselves. We're already seeing that. You're changing the climate so that you're having rains earlier and than the normal production process. And that's related to the snow, the melt, the whole thing. The fact that the Colorado River for the first time is going to cut back on historically the water for the West is concerning. Heat in itself, when you start raising, like you say, 7 degrees, our older bodies for older adults are not set up for that. And you're causing other issues with heat. It just goes on in terms of what will happen as we go further down this road if we don't reverse it. So this is a health crisis in terms of what it puts in the air and the pollution, but the health crisis is also with the methane causing the ozone, which causes, again, the climate, the changes in the climate.
You know, we started our cattle operation using a non-traditional ranching practice that was brought to the United States by Alan Savory from South Africa, and systems that had been developed there and in Europe long ago being introduced into the United States. And his system eventually became known as holistic with an H, holistic management. And it was specifically originally for cattle management, range management, and considering all the factors that went into getting a healthy animal to market. And it turned out that, you know, it wasn't just what was being taught at the ag school, at the ag college, or by your uncle. It was involved so many other inputs regarding particularly the health of the grassland, of the pasture, and everything that affected it, like the political policies, the grazing periods that the BLM would set up, the Bureau of Land Management, for leased lands, and what he would say was all stakeholders, that there was no solution possible without involving all stakeholders. And that eventually became a bigger train of study, and it turned out it applied to everything, not just raising cattle. So what you're talking about is that with methane, with the other host of deadly, toxic, and certainly harmful chemicals that come out with it, it is a whole host of, it's a holistic problem, but not just for the person that's on that well location or lives nearby, as many of our frontline communities do, but as well with our climate in general. We're having an effect worldwide. These pollution events, this amount of pollution being released into Mexico by the oil companies is having an effect in the world. And that's another thing I don't want to be famous for. So some things we don't want to be famous for, I guess, is what we're covering today. And you know, when you said the smoke in Albuquerque, and I think we always battle the thought that your friends and neighbors there in Albuquerque or say Santa Fe might not think oil and gas wells or pollution is a problem for them. But if they could just come with us, come with Miguel's organization, Earthworks, who has the oil and gas imaging cameras, the OGI cameras, we kind of know them as FLIR cameras. They make the invisible visible. You would have a smoke day every day if you put that FLIR camera on an active gas well or a pipeline facility or a gas processing facility. It would look like a smoke day. We saw a little bit of it in Miguel's video at the start there, but just see that methane boiling out and the camera picks it up and shows you it is not invisible. And it is not just methane, as you keep saying. And I want to repeat, it's the volatile organic compounds, the VOCs of toluene, benzene, xylene, ethylxylene, and others. And then if they do flare it, if they do get it on fire, then it's going to create our nitrogen oxides, or NOx. You see that acronym NOx. And that's what they're talking about. It's all the smog forming problems. And it just kind of, as such a proud New Mexico citizen, we go back several generations here in the state. We used to be famous for clean air. This was prior to the big oil and gas development, prior to the problems that we have now. People came here. We had tuberculosis centers all over the state, and it was famous that we were famous for a good reason. People would come here to clear treat their tubercular problems as well as asthma, and go to the great state of New Mexico for clean air. That's what I want to be famous for. And that's what I'm driving for in these rules that are upcoming. We have this big chance coming up. And when I say we, I mean not just Barbara Weber, not just me, but our viewers and our listeners. We all have this opportunity coming up. But it is pretty much a do or die equation right now, as the IPCC has pointed out. So Barbara, let's talk about the three areas where we really need to improve this proposed NMED rule. And one of them, the first one, I think is very close to what you've been talking about. And when I go through all three of the areas, I hope if you will come back and talk about this first area of really great concern, and that is strengthening the protections for the frontline communities and rural families like mine that live in close proximity to an oil or gas well or a production facility. So it's critically important that we strengthen these final rules, and I'm so hopeful about it because our neighbor to the north, Colorado, has done just that.
Exactly.
Here in this very first one, where you were talking about the disproportionate impact on children, communities of color, the various health impacts and the climate impacts, but especially in this rule that we want to have additional inspections and an additional level of care for those families, for those communities who, through no choice of their own, live next to something that's presents great danger to them. And what I say about that is that oil and gas brings that pollution not just to their doorstep, but to their face. And it's unavoidable. So for most of New Mexico and the West, much of the West, the federal government owns the minerals and much of the surface, and the landowner, believe it or not, has no say in where that oil and gas facility is going to go, and they are simply the victim of having lived where they've lived, maybe for millennia, certainly for generations, and that's where we need the protections that Colorado now offers to those living within proximity of oil and gas wells. I'm going to go ahead and repeat a couple things that are important to me. I just want to say methane never comes out of the ground by itself. It comes out with a host of toxic and deadly, certainly harmful chemicals. Those are the VOCs, volatile organic compounds that you talked about. If we burn them, then that's the NOx, the nitrogen oxides. So think of that, if you will, near your home. I have 33 wells that are within a mile of my home. 23 of those wells are within a half a mile or less of my home. There's nothing special about where we live. I mean, we like our ranch and we think it's great, but we are typical across the San Juan Basin. So many, many other rural families live in the proximity that we do. So it's in our face every day. We cannot move on that ranch without encountering oil and gas and what is called AVO, the audio, visual, and olfactory evidence that there are threats to our health there. We can hear it, audio, we can hear the gas venting. It's olfactory, we can smell it, it's right in your face. That's the part I'm talking about. And if you've been in the Permian, it's terrible there, but it's bad in the San Juan too. We can't drive in our truck and not be assaulted by the fumes from oil and gas. And then visually, of course, we can see it in the waves as they come off the tanks. We can see it when it's leaking and shooting out under pressure, hitting the dirt. And then we can also see the death of the vegetation around the well where it has been leaking. So, and we're talking about methane leaks here, not the oil spilled on the ground. So that's something we live with every day. We would like to be afforded the same protection. We would like our neighbors and our brothers on the nearby Navajo reservation or the Jicarillas that's just 17 miles to the west of us, or only 25 miles to the north of us, the Southern Ute tribe. We wish they would have the same protection that Colorado has in those frontline communities. So number one in the rules, frontline communities. Hold that place and come back and we'll talk about that if you can. The second area, again, very hopeful because Colorado has already done this, and that is we must strengthen the NMED final rule to include what is called completion. Just bear with me here and let me show you how easy it is to understand what I'm talking about. Completions is the activity that happens between drilling the well and bringing the well into production, hooking it up to the pipeline. So you have a process that goes between those two while the well is being cleaned up, primarily while the fracked material is being recovered out of the well and all the drilling debris and other things are happening between these two. What am I going to make? Drilling. Here's my drilling, and here's my production. What happens between those two is called completion. And unfortunately, that's what I was speaking of earlier. 4 days watching a frack job by Hillcore, where they vented that gas, all of it, the methane, the benzene, the toluene, all of it for 4 days under great pressure. It's directly into our atmosphere. So, and then for about 4 hours, they burned it, but that's not a desirable result either. Colorado would have made them capture that gas. And when I stand on my ranch on the high ground, I can look 25 miles to the north and see Colorado. So it's very disturbing for me to think, here's a major part of the problem, a creator of the methane hotspot, a creator of these health problems, a giant contributor to climate change, is allowed on a well on my ranch and not allowed on a well in Colorado by the same drilling contractor, say the same operator, drilling the same formation. So that's a gross inequity that needs to be rectified for people and their health. Whether it's a kind of a technical part of the drilling process or not, it has the same impact as all of the rest of the methane and VOC emissions, NOx emissions. So that is number two, completions. And number three is pneumatics. That's kind of a crazy sounding word and how would it apply, but it's just a term that says the oil company is going to use the pressure of the gas that's there already coming from underground to drive a valve open or close it or run another mechanism. It's a free source of power for them. They would have to use an electric motor or another process to power those valves open and shut, or there are other mechanical processes there. They get to use the natural gas for free. When they do, the dirty secret is that gas is released. It's emitted. It's never captured, and it can't be filtered. So there is this constant use of this free power to open and close valves, save them, money or sending labor out to do the job. There are many other alternatives for this that could be in use now, and it is a part of the Colorado rule. So again, Colorado is beating us in this rule. Pneumatics, again, I know it sounds a little bit wonky, but listen to this. Pneumatics is the second largest contributor to methane emissions. So this routine part of oil and gas operations is something that is very harmful to us. And of course, that's part of what the problem is for the frontline community, for the rural family, that those pneumatics are running right on the production and processing facilities that are near their homes. So, Barbara, can we back up? Let's talk about the 3 rural improvements we need again, and start with frontline communities. Why is that so important that we have heightened inspection and observation monitoring and standards there of homes close to the wells?
What is important for the frontline communities is they have we mitigate the risk that they are exposed to, because we know it causes major health problems. There's been a lot of studies, particularly within half a mile, and we're talking about 150,000 people in New Mexico who live within 150 miles of our 55,000 wells. So what the exciting thing is that there's technology, and sometimes oil and gas is going to be looking at their stakeholders and the profits they make for their stakeholders. The government of New Mexico has to be looking for the health of their citizens. So, the government of New Mexico will pay for this in health costs down the line. So it's not like that we're spending money that we aren't going to spend anyway. The other is that seeing that Colorado has done some of these things, we now have data. Oil and gas sometimes raises the issue that this will hurt their business. And we now know that since Colorado has put similar things into place, that has not been true. We have data to look at that. So I think the exciting thing is that technology can help us prevent the health issues that we're currently seeing with frontline people and children and elders who all live within half a mile of so many wells.
Barbara Weber, Health Action New Mexico, thank you so much for joining us today. And it was
thank you for having us.
Of course, it was so helpful for me, and I know for our watchers and viewers. And speaking to the watchers and viewers right now, I want you to know that you will have the opportunity to push for these strong rural improvements that we've been talking about. And the Environmental Improvement Board will hold a hearing on September 20th. It will begin on September 20th. We'll share the details. And we want you to remember to go to methanemattersnm.org/take action to do that. So join us next time on Clearing the Air as we try to make sense of climate change, have wonderful experts like Barbara here to make us understand better. We've got to address air pollution and energy development here in New Mexico. We will be back at noon, from noon to 1 p.m. on September 29th, and hear from the folks that are speaking up in the hearing at that time. So find all the information and sign up for reminders at cavu.org/clearing the air. So thank you all very much for joining us. We'll see you next time.